Chapter 121, Graveyard of Hope. In the next 10 minutes, the foundations of Sonny's worldview were shaken. To the core, Kai had drowned him in a torrent of questions, all of which had nothing to do with anything even remotely important. What interested the charming sleeper were very strange things like what types of shoes were in fashion, which celebrity wore what to some pompous award ceremony, who of them had a scandal and what was that scandal, about what was the latest dance craze, and so on. He was endlessly curious about that type of stupid crap, and absolutely indifferent about all of Sonny's dark secrets. It was almost insulting. What's worse, Sonny felt like a complete fool because he couldn't provide even a single answer. What did he know about fashion and high culture? Nothing. After a while, Kai's enthusiasm had waned. Looking at Sonny with a comically disheartened face, he sighed and gently asked one last question. Sonny, tell me honestly, were you a hikikomori in the real world as? Well, Sonny blinked. What is this fool talking about? A what? Kai cleared his throat and offered him an apologetic smile. You know, a recluse, a shut-in, someone who lives under a rock. Sonny stared at the gorgeous young man, feeling like the world completely stopped making any sense ever since they had met. What are you talking about? Why would I live under a rock? You would freeze to death. I lived in a cargo container once, but it had 4 walls and a roof at least. Kai sighed one more time and turned away. I see. Well, sorry to bother you. It's just that I've been stuck in this place for about 2.5 years now, and life here is so monotone. His beautiful profile was radiating melancholy and sadness, as though Kai was lamenting something serious, as opposed to utter rubbish. 2.5 years? That dimwit survived here for 2.5 years. Sonny was surprised to hear that. Kai seemed like a nice guy, but not exactly someone well-suited for the ruthless nightmare of the forgot. Sure, perhaps he had underestimated the charming sleeper, or perhaps there was another, much simpler reason. Sonny frowned. There was a group of people who tended to live here the longest, suddenly. Suspicious, he asked in a cold tone, "Are you a part of Gunlog's gang?" Kai looked at him with surprise, then he chortled. Gods, no, if there's one thing I absolutely despise, it's bullies like him. I would rather die than become one of Gunlog's minions. Plus, the man has no style. That armor of his is the most hideous thing I have ever seen. However, after saying that, he suddenly grew quiet and added after a few seconds in a dejected voice, "But I do accept jobs from his lieutenants from time to time. That is the reason why he tolerates my existence, so I don't really have a choice." Sonny hesitated for a bit, but then decided that he believed the other sleeper. He really didn't look like one of Gunlog's thugs. Besides, if he had been one of them, no sane person would have dared to kidnap and imprison him. Members of Gunlog's cohort were nearly untouchable, which meant that Kai was, indeed, much more capable than Sonny had given him credit for. Interesting. Noticing that the eerie sobs of the fallen beast had grown sufficiently distant, he shifted his perspective to the shadow and made sure that the terrible creature was already far away. Standing up, Sonny dismissed the glass bottle and said, "We're safe now. Time to move." Once they were ready to leave, he summoned the shadow back and prepared to take the first step forward. However, then Sonny suddenly stopped and glanced at the charming young archer with hesitation. "Hey, Kai, can I ask you a question as well?" The older sleeper smiled, honesty and eagerness written all over his face. "Of course." Sonny was silent for a couple of seconds, then said in a strange voice, "That armor of yours, do you wear it because it's the best one you could get, or because it looks good?" Kai looked at him with confusion. Raising one exquisite eyebrow, he said, "I don't understand the question. Is there a difference?" Sonny closed his eyes, sighed, and turned away. "Never mind, let's go." As the sun rose above the horizon, they went deeper into the city slowly. Approaching its center, the castle stood on a tall hill in the middle of the cursed city. It was grand and magnificent, with dozens of towers rising into the air, each supported by a number of elaborate arches and columns. Grotesque gargoyles were staring down on the ruins from under the eaves. The road leading to the castle was as impressive as the castle itself. It was narrow and heavily fortified, circling the hill in a way that allowed the defenders of the castle to endlessly rain arrows down on any possible attacker. At the end of the road, a grandiose staircase led to the gates of the castle. In front of it, there had once been a vast stone platform, meant to serve as the gathering ground for the soldiers, in case the enemy was to somehow breach all but this one last line of defense. Now the platform had turned into a makeshift settlement with small shabby buildings made out of stone, wood, and anything else the inhabitants of this slum could get their hands on standing chaotically here and there, forming messy groups and narrow alleys. This place did not look like the outskirts where Sonny had grown up, but it had the same unmistakable air of misery, fear, and desperation. As the two of them approached the outer settlement, several sleepers greeted Kai with friendly smiles. "Hey, Knight, glad to see you, man. Where have you been lately?" Kai smiled in embarrassment. Flying around. What about you, pal?" While the charming young man was exchanging pleasantries with his acquaintance, Sonny cautiously looked around. The place had imperceptibly changed since the last time he was here. The settlement itself seemed to be almost the same, with just a few buildings, slightly changing shapes. The people, however, somehow seemed more energized and confident, as though the ever-present fear of death and starvation was not as pressing anymore. However, there was a strange sense of tension in the air. I guess she was busy in these 3 months, too. Finally managing to end the conversation, Kai turned to him and smiled. Apologetically, "Sorry about that." Sonny frowned. "Why are they calling you Knight?" The charming young man stared at him, then cleared his throat and said, with a bit of strangeness in his voice, "Oh, you really don't know? Well, it's a nickname of sorts. Nightingale. That's how I am known around these parts." What a stupid nickname, Sonny thought, and decided to get things done as quickly as possible. He couldn't wait to leave this depressing place. "All right, since we're here, time to make good on your promise." Kai gave him a nod. "Sure, what do you need me to do?" Sonny looked around, making sure that no one could hear them, and said, "It's simple. Go into the castle and find out about who is selling memories, and what the price is, then come back and report to me." His companion blinked a couple of times, clearly surprised, then shrugged. "No problem, but it's going to take a while. If you want the best information possible, of course." Sonny grimaced. "Do as you see fit. I'll be waiting for you in that alley over there." Kai looked at him one last time, smiled, and walked away. Feeling nervous and tense, Sonny walked to a secluded alley and rested his back against the wall. He tried to become as small and unnoticeable as possible. Being here was making his skin crawl. Maybe his decision to come back was a mistake after all. Maybe he should simply turn around and walk away. However, he didn't. Deep down inside, he knew that he had to take this opportunity to gather as many memories as possible so that his shad could become stronger as fast as possible. Perhaps he would never get this opportunity again. Time slowly passed. An hour went by, then another. Kai was certainly taking his sweet time gathering the information Sonny had asked from him. However, nothing bad had happened. Yet, Sonny was almost starting to believe that he was nervous for nothing. But then, of course, the thing he dreaded the most became a reality. A calm, painfully familiar voice suddenly resounded from somewhere behind him. "Hi, Sonny." He froze, feeling like a beast caught in a trap, and then slowly turned around. A strange, complicated expression appeared on his face. Forcing out a smile, Sonny licked his suddenly dry lips and said, "Hey, Neff. Long time no see." Chapter 122, 4 months ago. Nephai's changed a lot since the last time Sonny had seen her. Outwardly, she looked almost the same, tall, firm, and strangely distant, as though existing slightly apart from the rest of the world. She was still wearing the Starlight Legion armor, which accentuated the graceful lines of her slender, lithe body. Only now there was also a white cloak draped over her shoulders, close in color to the pristine metal of the elegant plate armor. Changing Star's silver hair was much longer now, almost reaching her shoulders. Without the short tomboyish cut, she looked strangely mature and feminine, making Sonny's heart beat a little faster. Her calm gray eyes were as striking as ever. The true changes, however, hid much deeper. Perhaps only a person who knew her as well as Sonny did could notice them, or perhaps it was precisely because he had come to know her so well that the veil of detached indifference shrouding her true self cracked, revealing the deeper feelings beneath. Nephai seemed to be much more alive now, much more present. Her eyes shined with resolve and determination, radiating an almost infectious feeling of temperate confidence. This was her power, the power of conviction. Sonny shivered under that gaze. Neff was the person he longed to see the most and at the same time hoped to never see again. She was the true reason why he had to leave the castle. Stirred awake by this fated meeting, a torrent of memories rose to the surface of his mind. If only he had known at the time. Well, it would not have changed anything, really. 4 months ago, on the night that they had ventured into the cursed sea on a boat made of demons' bones, Sonny was shivering in the wind. After an eternity spent in the cold embrace of darkness, the endless night of their escape was finally drawing its last breaths. He shifted and turned to the east, where a ghostly line of pale lilac appeared over the horizon. Trembling, he licked his lips and said in a raspy voice, Cassie, it's morning." After he uttered these words, the last remnant of strength that had kept, Sunny going disappeared, and he slumped on the stones, his chest rising heavily and then falling. A new dawn was ready to bathe the desolate hell of the forgotten shore in warm sunlight. They had survived. The three sleepers were perched on a giant stone hand that protruded from the black waves, as if held above the lightless abyss by a goddess. Sunny and Cassie were holding each other for warmth, while Nephise was lying in the center of the stone palm, still unconscious, visible through the gaps in the shattered armor. Her ivory skin was pale and listless. "We did it." They had escaped the clutches of Soul Devourer, sailed through the cursed darkness, and even lived through a battle with the horrifying dweller of the depths by some miracle. Sunny couldn't quite believe that they had actually managed to pull their daring escape off. From the moment he had learned about the enthrallment hex put onto their minds by the ancient fiend, he felt that the chances of ever saving themselves from the gluttonous evil tree were more than slim. Perhaps because it had taken away his most dangerous and tested weapon, his mind. And yet somehow they had succeeded. Utterly exhausted, Sunny closed his eyes and listened to the dark sea as it retreated to hide from the coming sun. Without even noticing it, he slipped into the embrace of sleep. When he awoke, the sun was already high in the sky. Sunny expected to feel crippled now that adrenaline had left his battered body, but to his surprise, he wasn't in even half as much pain as he had anticipated. Blood weave was truly a miraculous attribute to have for someone as prone to disasters as he was. Even his broken finger wasn't hurting that much anymore. Sunny still had to groan while sitting up, though. Cassie was sleeping by his side, as drained by the events of the previous night as he was, perhaps even more so. Her delicate face seemed vulnerable and pale, twisted in an anxious frown. Sunny sighed. Nephise had yet to regain her senses. At some time while he slept, the blind girl had used her cloak to cover Changing Star, helping her to preserve some warmth. Neph lay still and motionless, her face drained of all color. Only the quiet sound of her breathing told Sunny that she was still alive. He trembled, remembering the harrowing sight of her mangled flesh, restoring itself in the crucible of purifying flame. Unleashing that flame always took a heavy toll on Nephise, bringing her unimaginable pain and suffering. Who knew what price she had paid to pull herself away from the doors of oblivion? He had not even realized before that she could use it to heal herself. Perhaps there was a reason why she had never done so in the past. Only time could tell. It's time to assess the situation. Turning away from Changing Star, Sunny looked around, trying to discern their current circumstances. His heart was heavy. If they had survived the attack of the tentacle monster and the ensuing shipwreck, only to find themselves stranded in the middle of the cursed sea, with no way to continue forward, that would be a truly macabre twist of fate. To the east of them, there was nothing but the empty expanse of the colossal crater. Same thing for the Sunny froze, noticing a dark line in the distance. That was the western edge of the crater. They had almost crossed it. Feeling a strange excitement grasping his heart, Sunny quickly turned around and looked west. His eyes widened. For a few moments his head was silent and empty, then a single thought appeared in it. We were so close. He sat quietly for a long time, forgetting about everything else. A few hours later, Cassie finally woke up, feeling that he wasn't next to her anymore. She called in a frightened voice, "Sunny." He licked his lips. "I'm here." Cassie sat up and stretched her hand out, finding his shoulder. Why do you sound so strange?" Sunny blinked, then slowly turned his head to look at the blind girl. Tentative smile found its way onto his face. "Cassie, we found it. We have found that city you saw." In the end, Nephise had remained unconscious for 2 whole days. Sunny was really starting to worry about her, but then, on the 3rd day, Changing Star had finally come back to her sense. At the time, he was sitting on top of the giant hand's index finger, staring west with a warm, excited feeling in his heart. They did it. They were finally going to go home. Sunny couldn't wait to return to the real world. He didn't even care about becoming an awakened and the corresponding leap in power and status that much anymore. All he cared about was his soft bed, mountains of delicious food, and limitless hot showers. Sunny lowered his head and glanced at Nephise, trying to determine if their Was anything wrong with her? In the webtoons, one of the characters was bound to suffer from something like amnesia right before things were about to take a turn for the better. But Changing Star seemed to be fine. She was still the same Neff he had, known tall, firm, and strangely distant, as though there was an invisible barrier separating her from the rest of the world. When the gaze of her striking gray eyes fell on him, Sonny felt his heart beating a little faster. He smiled. Thank gods. Nephise frowned, lowered her head, and then asked in a flat tone, Why are you smiling? Realizing that he was grinning from ear to ear like a fool, Sonny blinked, then tried to shrug with false indifference. Abort, abort, divert her attention. Look behind you. The sight of what lay in the west was one of the reasons for his good mood. So it wasn't that much of a stretch. Neff stared at him for a few moments, then sighed and turned around. Behind her, a tall city wall built of gray polished stone towered above the slopes of the colossal crater. That wall was a sign that all their suffering was not in vain, and that all their dreams were about to come true. It was hope. Chapter 123, Helping Hand, Shadow Slave. Soon after Nephise had finally come back to her senses, they prepared to leave the shelter of the giant stone hand. The morning had just begun, so there was plenty of time to cross the remaining distance and climb out of the deep and vast crater. If all was going to go well, they would meet the next sunset on top of the tall wall of the mysterious city. Of course, numerous things could go wrong between now and then, but for some reason, Sonny felt optimistic. This was a rare moment for his cynical, paranoid heart. Just like before, Sonny and Neff took turns climbing down a few dozen meters and lowering Cassie to one another with the help of the golden rope. However, they had grown considerably stronger since the last time they had to do it. Sonny remembered how tiresome it was to descend from the giant knight's statue in that way and chuckled. Now he felt as though he could do it 3 times in a row and considerably faster too, even though he had spent the last few days in an endless nightmare and brought his body to the point where it was about to shut down. Now there was nothing but resilient strength filling his muscles. These 2 months that they had spent in the perilous hell of the Crimson Labyrinth, constantly fighting for their lives and slaying monsters that no sleeper should ever face one after another, had made all 3 of them much more powerful. Sonny doubted that a lot of Awakened had ever gone through this ruthless of an initiation and lived to tell the tale. Once he returned to the real world, he would most likely be considered one of the elite representatives of the current generation. That might actually be a problem. Well, he could always blame everything on Nephise. She was already close to being a mythical existence, the last daughter of the legendary immortal Flame Clan, one of the few Awakened in history who had managed to receive a true name in the first nightmare, the top student in her batch of sleepers in the academy, and so on. People would easily believe that a prodigy like her had been able and willing to carry 2 pathetic weaklings on her back all the way to the gateway. Sonny just had to choose his words carefully when describing the events leading up to their triumphant return. Luckily, in that regard, he was a master, entertaining himself with such thoughts. He didn't even notice the flow of time. Soon they were already approaching the ground. Just before jumping into the soft black mud, Nephise looked at Sonny and said, Stay vigilant. She didn't have to remind him. Sonny knew that the last stretch was often the most dangerous, mostly because it was natural for people to allow themselves to relax in these moments, falsely believing that the worst was already behind them. Numerous Awakened perished tragically with their goal already in sight. He wasn't planning on becoming one of them. Sonny carefully lowered Cassie down, watched as Neff helped her step out of the rope loop and jumped down. He landed on the ground in a nimble roll, immediately jumped to his feet and outstretched one hand, ready to summon the Midnight Shard at a moment's notice. However, nothing was trying to kill them. Sonny and Nephise exchanged tense looks and then slowly walked forward. With each minute, the distant gray wall was growing closer. At some point, Sonny gestured for Changing Star to stop and turned around, curious to take a look at the statue whose hand had saved them from drowning in the dark depths of the cursed sea. Out there on the slope of the colossal crater, slightly tilted to the side, a giant statue of a slender woman dressed in a light-flowing robe towered over the black mud. She was lovely and graceful, with a slim waist and delicate arms outstretched to the skies, as though trying to embrace them. At least that was how she had looked once, a long time ago. Now one of the arms was broken off, with only its shoulder remaining in place. Luckily, the other one was still there, and had served as a safe haven for the 3. sleepers in their moment of desperate need. Just as Sunny expected, there were 7 shining stars carved into the stone surface of her robe. What piqued his curiosity the most, though, was the fact that just like the giant knight, the graceful woman seemed to be missing her head. Once, again, Sunny wondered if these stone titans were created without faces to begin with, or if something had beheaded them much later in a fit of destructive rage. 7 severed heads guarding 7 seals, he thought, remembering Cassie's frightening vision. The mystery of that vision was nothing short of tantalizing. However, it seemed as though it was destined to remain unsolved. Sunny doubted that he would ever come back to this cursed place after returning to the real world. There were many regions in the dream realm, and almost every one of them was far better than the hellish Forgotten Shore. To hell with all this crap. Sending silent gratitude to the statue that had saved their lives, Sunny turned around and headed west. As they approached the section of the slope that was almost vertical, something dangerous finally happened. Just as Sunny was about to step on a wide stone buried in the mud, the stone suddenly shifted and rolled to the side. A terrible roar resounded across the vast emptiness of the colossal crater, making him shiver in fright. Fearing that something was crawling from under the soil, Sunny jumped back and summoned his sword. To his side, Nephi's was doing the same, while Cassie swiftly stepped back to not be in the way. However, there was nothing moving in the mud. No giant beast rose from it to feast on their flesh. No horrifying abomination had extended its limbs to pull them underground into its maw. Then what made that terrible roar? Just as Sunny was trying to understand what was happening, a sharp pain suddenly pierced his right leg. Looking down, he saw. The damn stone was chomping on his shin. The stone, which turned out to be a bizarre nightmare creature, revealed a mouth full of long, sharp teeth on its surface. It awkwardly rolled a couple of times to reach Sunny, and then tried to dig its fangs into his soft flesh. It might have bitten Sunny's leg clean off, but luckily the leather boot of the puppeteer's shroud turned out to be too tough for the stone's jaws, so it was just munching on the leather in powerless resentment. The situation was painful, but not at all dangerous. Sunny stared at the stone, then raised his head and glanced at Nephi's in bewilderment. Her expression was as indifferent as always, but after all the time they had spent together, he was able to recognize the similar kind of amusement written clearly on her face. Ugh. Sunny strained his muscles, raised the trapped leg into the air and shook it a couple of times, trying to send the stupid stone flying. However, the weird monster was really stubborn. With another thunderous roar, it doubled its attempts to gnaw on Sunny's shin, its stone teeth on the verge of shattering from all the pressure exerted on them. What a pathetic thing. The only hope of killing me it has is if I die from annoyance, Sunny thought with a confused frown. How could a nightmare creature like this even exist? I guess there are losers even among their kind, eh? Shaking his head, Sunny allowed the shadow to wrap itself around the midnight shard and brought the tip of the blade down on the hungry stone. With all the strength he had, the Takai was met with some resistance, but managed to pierce and shatter the monster's stone body in the end. The bizarre creature died while still trying to take a bite out of Sunny, defiant till the very end. As the shattered remains of the stone fell into the mud, the voice of the spell whispered, "You have slain an awakened monster, Rolling Stone. Your shadow grows stronger." "You have?" Seeing a strange expression on Sunny's face, Nephi's asked, "What's wrong?" He looked at her and blinked a couple of times. I just received a memory." Changing Star raised her eyebrow and said in an uplifted tone, "That is great." "What type of memory?" Sunny scratched his head, hesitated, and then answered, It's a rock, an ordinary rock." Chapter 124, Desolation Shadow Slave. Soon, they were standing beneath the impregnable stone walls of the mysterious city. Behind them, the great chasm of the vast crater stretched to the horizon. Somewhere ahead, the lone human citadel in this loathsome region of the dream realm awaited. It promised to deliver them from this dark place and bring them home. Sunny really couldn't wait to be finally done with this nightmare. The city wall was built from massive slabs of gray granite, still wet from the cold touch of the cursed sea. The ancient weathered stones looked almost black, despite the thousands of years that passed since the mysterious builders of the wall had disappeared into the fog of time. It still looked monumental and unassailable. The joints between the granite slabs were barely wide enough to insert a narrow blade. Looking up, Sunny tried to guess the height of the wall. It had to be 60 meters tall, at least twice as high as the Awakened Academy defense. barrier which was constructed with the help of both modern technology and various aspect abilities. For a few moments, he wondered about the people who had erected this wall, the city behind it, and the giant statues that still stood lonesomely on the desolate shores of this cursed land. Their creations had withstood the onslaught of darkness and time, but the creators were gone. Who had they been? What terrible fate had befallen the citizens of the ruined city? But then, Sonny angrily shook his head. These mysteries had nothing to do with him anymore. He was going home, never to return to this awful pit of horror and despair. Let someone else solve them. After a short rest, they decided that it would be easier to climb the wall, instead of circling it in search of an entrance. Even if they were to find a gate, there was no guarantee that it would be open. Climbing the wet granite was not an easy task, but they somehow managed. When there was nothing to use as a hold, Sonny and Nephis resorted to using their swords by inserting them into the joints between the slabs. A few unpleasant cuts later, they found the right rhythm and made quick progress, enhanced by the consumed soul shards and shadow fragments, as well as the ruthless training regimen of the never-ending battle for survival. Their bodies were full of strength and endurance. Both of them were at the peak of human physical ability. Pretty soon they had reached the top of the massive wall and climbed over its edge. Without even needing to catch his breath, Sonny hungrily crawled forward, jumped to his feet, and gazed down. In the ensuing silence, he could hear the sound of the golden rope scratching against stone. However, his heart was beating louder. Soon Nephis and Cassie joined him. The blind girl grasped his shoulder and asked, her voice bright and full of hope, "Sonny, what do you see?" He licked his lips. Beneath them, an expansive city lay in ruins. The beautiful stone buildings were broken and shattered, many of them turned into mere piles of rubble. There were no people walking along the wide streets, no clamor of voices to drive away the silence. Under the cold gray sky, the ruined city looked dead and mournful. It was impossible to say what terrible disaster had happened here, but it was clear that it was not natural. Many of the collapsed houses were blackened by fire, with claw marks cut into the still-standing fragments of walls. Here and there, monstrous bones of ancient horrors protruded from the ground, telling tales of desperate battles that must have had taken place on these streets once a long time ago. Looking closer, Sonny felt cold sweat running down his back. There were strange shapes moving through the rubble, and even more hiding in the shadows. Seeing them filled him with an icy sense of dread. The ruined city was teeming with nightmare creatures. There is a vast, ruined city built of weathered stone, and there are numerous monsters wandering its streets, just like you said there would be. The tall city wall they were standing on was as wide as a road. It stretched endlessly in both directions, enclosing the vast ruins into a strangely perfect circle. Every so often, there were towers built into its impenetrable granite body, serving as bastions against potential enemies. Who would have thought that one day this great barrier would serve not to repel the horrible monsters, but to keep the true horrors imprisoned inside? But Sonny wasn't that interested in the wall. He wasn't even too interested in the monsters. Instead, his eyes were drawn to the tall hill towering up the ruins. On that hill, there is a magnificent castle standing on a hill in the middle of the ruins. It looks like something out of a legend. Its walls are built from radiant white stone with tall towers and majestic spires piercing the sky. It stands above the city like a symbol of hope, the only thing in this hell that seems to be untouched by the darkness. And a wide smile appeared on Cassie's face. "Yes, this is the castle I saw." However, Sonny didn't hear her. Just as he was describing the splendor of the bright castle to the blind girl, his gaze accidentally slid behind it. Now all he could see was the dark silhouette of a cyclopean tower that loomed above the world like an unholy spear made out of solidified blood. As soon as Sonny saw it, his heart was gripped by an unexplainable fear. This was the Crimson Spire. The feeling of horror it emanated was enough to make him never wish to gaze at it again, and yet he wasn't able to look away. By his side, Nephis was staring at it too, her thoughts a mystery. There was a tense, dark expression on her face. After a few seconds had passed, Changing Star was finally able to compose herself and turned away. Looking in the direction of the castle, she frowned and said, "The final stretch of the way to the Citadel might be extremely dangerous. We must not hurry. Let's find a way down first." Chapter 125, A Feast in Time of Plague. Neither Nephis nor Sonny wanted to climb down from the wall, because that would leave them with no path of retreat, should something terrible happen. Without the need to discuss it, they had decided to explore the nearest tower and see if there was a suitable way to descend from the wall. Inside of it, they followed the slightly bending wall north, keeping an eye on the ruins. Below, from time to time, Sunny was able to notice the shapes of creatures moving through the desolate streets of the ancient city. However, nothing seemed to be interested in scaling its tall granite bulwark. For the time being, they were safe. However, he didn't feel safe. Instead, he kept glancing at the distant axis of the crimson spire and shivering. That thing was seriously way too ominous. Good thing we will be out of here soon. That was the only thought that kept him from falling into an irrational panic. Their journey through the Forgotten Shore was about to end. They had endured a lot and survived through a lot. At times, he had not even been sure that they were going to make it out of here alive. But now all their suffering was about to be rewarded. The path to freedom was already in their sight. They just had to overcome this one last hurdle to return home in glory. Soon they were closing in on one of the mighty towers built into the wall. The structure was round in shape, rising above the main embankment by a good dozen meters. There was a wide wooden gate leading inside the tower, which was broken a long time ago, with only a few splinters remaining on the ancient iron hinges. Behind the doorway there was nothing but darkness. Sunny felt that the sight of this entrance was a bit creepy. Of course, darkness was nothing to him, and yet, suddenly Cassie tugged on his shoulder, forcing Sunny to stop. Both him and Nephi's turned to her, their hands outstretched and ready to summon their swords. "What is it, Cassie?" Sunny asked, alarmed. In some situations, the blind girl was able to recognize danger before they could. Her keen hearing and sense of smell allowed her to sometimes perceive things that normal humans would not be able to. Now there was a scowl on Cassie's face. Turning her head slightly, she whispered, "Listen." Sunny held his breath and followed her words, straining his hearing to the limit. Soon, he was able to discern a strange sound coming from inside the tower. Chomp, chomp, crunch. Chompy. It sounded like something was being devoured there, flesh and bones, being ground by sharp teeth. The nauseating sound of meat being torn and chewed made him grimace. Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other, then summoned their swords. Like usual, before the two of them moved forward, Sunny sent his shadow to investigate the potential enemy. The shadow glided on the stones, quickly approaching the tower. Then it dove into the darkness and concealed itself in the vast shade that permeated the structure. Sunny was able to see inside. The first thing he saw was several dead monsters lying on the stone in puddles of blood. The bloody trails left on the stone floor suggested that their massive bodies were dragged here by something very powerful. They were cut apart and eviscerated, as though dressed down by an enthusiastic butcher. Then he saw a large pile of gnawed bones lying on the stones. Some of them still had pieces of meat stuck to them, while others were split apart and emptied of even the marrow. The next thing he saw was a fire burning in a circle of stone shards, with several skewers of monster meat roasting above it. Next to the fire, the source of the chomping and crunching sounds was sitting on the stones, munching on a well-roasted rib. It was a human. In fact, it was a young woman. She seemed to be only slightly older than the three of them. Sunny blinked. The young woman was tall and attractive. She had hazel eyes and beautiful brown hair currently tied in a simple braid. Her build was extremely athletic, with perfectly defined lean muscles rolling under the dewy olive skin with each movement, and there was a lot of skin on display, since she only wore a provocatively short white tunic, augmented with bronze greaves, vambraces, and a cuirass with leather taroges. While Nephi's was slender and lithe, this stranger radiated a sense of vitality and vigor. Everything about her was lavish and generous, screaming of strength, potency, and power. The strangest part, however, was that there was an absolutely relaxed, comfortable, and happy expression on her face. In the months spent on the Forgotten Shore, Sunny had never, even for a second, allowed himself to lower his guard completely. Neither had Nephi's or Cassie. Even in the rare moments of rest, sheltered in reliable safety, they were always slightly tense, expecting all kinds of horrors to fall on them in an onslaught of teeth, poison, and claws. Even while under the hex of the soul devourer, there was always an invisible shadow in their hearts. However, the young woman seemed to be completely content with being in this cursed place. In fact, she looked happier than Sunny had ever been, even in the real world. As Sunny watched, the young woman messily devoured the meat of the unfortunate monster. The juices were flowing down her face and fingers. Done with the meat, she bit on the bone itself. His eyes widened. The adamantine bone of the nightmare creature was easily crushed. Between her teeth and closing her eyes in pleasure, the girl proceeded to suck out the marrow, then chew and swallow most of the bone itself. Crunch, crunch, chomp, crunch. Finished with the rib, she threw its remains into the disturbingly sizable pile of bones at her feet, loudly burped with no decorum whatsoever then, immediately stretched her hand out to pick up another piece of monster meat from the fire and sunk her teeth into it. Sonny blinked a couple of times more, then shifted his perspective back and looked at Nephi's. What did you see? He lingered for a bit and then said in a hesitant tone, well, it's either a very hungry human girl or a very gluttonous demon. Chapter 126, Effie Shadow Slave. Nephi stared at him for a few moments, then turned her head to Cassie and said, follow behind us. The three of them cautiously approached the entrance to the tower and lingered there, uncertain of how they should proceed. In their minds, there were two outcomes to this unexpected situation. One, the mysterious young woman would turn out to be a local awakened. In that case, all their problems were going to be solved. If an awakened happened to meet a group of sleepers in the wild reaches of the dream realm, it was customary to guide them to the nearest human citadel. Of course, exceptions happened, but in general, awakened strived to take care of sleepers in this alien land. Humans had to band together. It was not only a moral obligation, but also in their own best interest. Two, the stranger would turn out to be a nightmare creature. In that case, they were going to have a tough fight on their hands. Since the rank and class of the enemy were unknown, it was impossible to predict the result. They just had to risk it. Drawing a deep breath, Sonny followed Nephi's into the cool darkness of the tower. Immediately, the appetizing smell of roasting meat hit his nostrils. His stomach growled, crap. Before Sonny could react, a piece of bone flew past his head and hit the wall with enough force to shatter into tiny pieces. Belatedly, he raised the midnight shard and assumed a defensive stance. But it was a little too late. The young woman had already been alerted of their presence. Raising her head, she bared her teeth in a wide grin and murmured, is someone hiding in the shadows? Why don't you come out to play? Her voice was deep, smoky, and had a raspy huskiness to it. But what mattered the most was that she was speaking in the human language. She was human. Probably. The stranger was still sitting in a relaxed pose, but Sonny didn't miss the subtle tension in her carved muscles. He had no doubt that the alleged awakened could explode into a whirlwind of violence at any moment. It was better not to provoke her. Glancing at Neph, he followed her example and dismissed his sword. Then, the three of them hesitantly stepped into the circle of light cast by the bonfire. The young woman looked at them in surprise and raised her eyebrows. Humans? Huh, unexpected. Then she smiled and shook her head. Ah, where are my manners? With that, she lightly rose to her feet. The white fabric of her tunic shifted, slightly revealing even more of her toned, powerful thighs. Sonny blinked. He had assumed that the stranger was tall, but only now did he realize how imposing her true height was. The woman stood considerably taller than even Nephi's, not to mention Sonny himself. Complete with her robust physique, olive skin, and archaic armor, she looked like an ancient goddess. Craning his neck to look her in the eyes was sort of irritating, though. But Sonny had no choice. If he were to just look straight, his line of sight would land directly on her shapely, The young woman, meanwhile, wiped her dirty face with a forearm and gestured at the fire. Here, would you like to take a seat? Despite the polite invitation, they hesitated. After several seconds passed in awkward silence, Nephi's finally took a step forward and asked the question that had been tormenting all three of them. With her voice uncharacteristically tense and full of suppressed emotion, she cautiously said, Are you human? The stranger stared at her with a blank expression, then blinked a couple of times. What else would I be? A horse? With that, she threw her head back and laughed loudly, amused by her own silly joke. Nephi's and Sonny glanced at each other, confused as to what to do. Meanwhile, the young woman giggled a few more times and looked at them, with sparks of glee dancing in her eyes. Of course I am human. Why are you even asking? Anyway, come sit. My neck is tired from looking down on you. With that, she sat down near the fire and assumed a relaxed pose. Nephi's, Sonny and Cassie finally approached and lowered themselves to the stones. Looking at the tall girl with hungry flames burning in their eyes, she looked them over, then frowned a little. Haven't seen you guys around. Are you new? Nephi's gave her a nod. Yes, we have just reached the city. She was trying very hard to act like a normal, well-adjusted person. It seemed that her endless attempts to improve her social skills had not been in vain. If Sunny didn't know how awkward and clumsy Neff's natural state was, he wouldn't have suspected anything. The young woman grinned. In that case, my condolence. Wait, you guys survived for 2 whole months in the labyrinth. She whistled and looked at them with newfound respect. That's a real feat. Congratulations. Nephi's lingered for a few seconds, then said, I'm Nephi's, and these are my companions, Kasha and Sunless. We are sleepers who came here during the winter solstice. The young woman gave them a wide, friendly smile. Nice to meet you, I'm Effie. Well, at least that's what people call me. I'm also a sleeper. Sunny frowned. So the beautiful giantess was not an awakened, just sleeper like them. Strangely, he didn't remember ever seeing her in the academy. Still, too impatient to remain silent, he leaned forward and said, Are you from the castle? There are people living there, right? Effie glanced at him. In her eyes there was a hint of a strange emotion. It almost looked like pity. There are indeed people living in the castle, yes. Nephi's and Sunny exchanged excited looks, then changing cautiously asked, Can you take us there? Effie shrugged. Sure, no problem. Do you guys have shards? Sunny blinked. What did soul shards have to do with any this? They had retrieved 2 from that weird stone he had killed at the base of the wall. Was she going to ask for payment? Nephi's retrieved the soul shards and showed them to the tall girl. We have 2. Effie sighed. Only 2. Well, it's better than nothing, I guess. Keep them. You'll need them later. Not quite understanding the meaning of her words, Changing Star lingered, then said uncertainly, We were hoping to reach the Citadel and access the gateway as soon as possible. How long will it take? The young woman stared at them for a long time, and then suddenly bent over in a fit of hysterical laughter. She laughed so long and hard that tears soon appeared in the corners of her eyes. Unpleasantly surprised, the 3 sleepers stared at her in shock. None of them understood the reason for this bizarre behavior. Is she insane? Sunny frowned, reevaluating the situation. Previously, the local girl just seemed to be a bit eccentric, but maybe there was more to it. Effie's laughter stopped as abruptly as it had started. Wiping her tears, she shook her head and said in a strange tone, Sorry guys. I just couldn't help myself. Please forgive my lack of manners. Then she straightened her back, looked them heavily into the eyes and said, I can take you to the castle, but there is no gateway there. In fact, there's no way out of this cursed hell at all. I've been stuck here for 3 years. Myself already. So welcome to the Dark City, I guess. Abandon hope all. Ye who enter here and all that. Chapter 127. Abandon all hope. Shell-shocked by her words, the 3 of them stared at the young woman. With pale faces, Sunny felt something brittle and precious shattering in his heart, piercing it with an almost physical feeling of pain. No, it can't be. It just couldn't be true. How could all of this have been for nothing? How could all of his hopes, dreams, and desires just be destroyed with a couple of words? How was it possible? Somewhere beside him, Cassie suddenly said in a tiny voice, What do you mean there is no gateway? Effie shrugged. It's very simple, really. I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you, but deep down inside you must have known already. Didn't you, the Forgotten? Sure, it's not really a place where humans are supposed to survive. That's why you have never heard of anything like it in the school or the academy. Sunny's face got contorted with anger. Of course, the answer was always within his grasp. He was just too naive and foolish to grasp it. The dream realm was vast and strange, with most of its regions barely explored by humans. However, there was at least a small amount of information available about them. Some were even fully under human control, with large citadels like Bastion providing shelter to hundreds of thousands of awakened. And yet, when he had first come to the Forgotten Shore, Sunny didn't recognize any of the unique characteristics of this place. At the time, he had thought that his patchy education was to blame. He should have realized the truth when neither Nephi's nor Cassie managed to succeed where he had failed. Why would a region as unique as this one be utterly unknown? The most logical explanation would be that no one had ever returned from this deadly abyss to the real world to tell others about it. What a fool he was, just a few weeks in the comfortable life in the academy, and he had completely forgotten that the world never played fair. Against people like him, the truth was always worse than his worst expectations, so why would this time be any different? The world was a predator that always waited for an opportunity to devour. Why would he even expect anything else? A familiar bitter taste appeared in his mouth. Meanwhile, Effie continued in a gentle tone. 15 years ago or so, a group of powerful and desperate sleepers managed to reach this city and claim the castle for themselves. Not because it had a gateway, but because it was the only place that could keep them safe, at least for a while. Ever since then, a few lucky or resourceful people would find their way to the castle each solstice, only to get stuck here with the rest of us. Nephise was sitting quietly, with only her clenched fists betraying the storm of emotions raging in her heart. Cassie was taking the news harder than both of them, though. After all, it was her vision that led them into this trap. Her face was deathly pale, with an expression of pain and shock contorting its delicate lines. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "But that is not fair." Effie looked at her with pity. Then she chuckled, smiled darkly, and said, "When was anything ever fair?" She was right, of course. Justice didn't really exist outside of the ethereal realm of human imagination. Sonny had learned that lesson a long, long time ago. While he was stewing in his indignant despair, Effie's smile suddenly lost its grim undertone and turned into a happy grin once again. Leaning forward a little, she said, "But it's not all bad. At least you have met me. You guys are incredibly lucky, really. If you hadn't run into a local, you would have been dead already." Nephi stared at her and asked in a flat tone, "Yeah, why is that?" Her awkward manner of speech was back again in all its glory. Effie sighed. "The Dark City is simultaneously the safest place to be on the Forgotten Shore and also the deadliest. It is safe because no sea monster can cross the wall, let alone reach the castle. But at the same time, it is far more dangerous than the labyrinth because almost every nightmare creature here is of the fallen rank." Sonny blinked, feeling a cold shiver permeate his whole body. Fallen creatures were immeasurably more powerful than awakened ones. Dormant humans like them had no business fighting against the latter, let alone the former. One awakened demon was already more than they could handle without resorting to summoning a true terror from the depths of the cursed sea. Something much more powerful than the carapace demon would simply wipe them out from existence in a matter of seconds. Remembering countless shapes moving through the ruins, he couldn't help but tremble. Was each of those shapes a fallen monster? How would anyone survive even a day in this cursed city? They would have to be insane to even try. Slowly, the magnitude of the perilous trap they had found themselves in began to seep into his mind. Effie smiled. "But you guys managed to stumble into me before descending from the wall. Otherwise, the fallen ones would have been feasting on your souls. Already lucky, very lucky. There are very few people in the castle who go out hunting in the ruins, let alone venture so far away from it. Meeting an experienced hunter like me was probably your only chance to avoid finding out about the true face of the Dark City a second too late." She shook her head. "That's like 1 to 1,000, 10,000, a million. At any rate, the odds were really not in your favor. Fortune is definitely in love with that. Least one of you guys, so cheer up. Do you want some meat? I had a truly amazing hunt today. It was so amazing that I don't even mind sharing." Nephise didn't even look at the roasting meat, and instead leaned forward, her words filled with intensity. "If there is no gateway here, why didn't you try to leave?" Effie blinked a couple of times and looked at her with sincere confusion. "Leave and go where?" The meat was about to become burnt, so she leaned to the fire and removed the skewers, then replaced them with a couple of new ones. Then, with a sigh, she turned to Changing Star and said, "You've been to the labyrinth, so you know what it's like. There's nothing else but that damn coral and cursed sea for months of travel in every direction. You can't go on foot, you can't swim. You can't even fly because there are swarms of dreadful flying abominations hiding in the clouds. But try to leave, yeah, many have tried, they're all dead now. Actually, that's how the initial master of the castle had perished." Sonny gritted his teeth. "So what? You guys just hide in the castle and wait for death?" The beautiful young woman laughed. "Of course not, doofus." Then she pierced him with an unexpectedly grim look of her hazel eyes and said, "Most of us can't even get into the castle. The king demands his tax, you know, so we just wait for death outside." Chapter 128, King of the Hill. Sonny stared at her, trying to understand the meaning behind the strange words. "What do you mean?" Effie shrugged. "The castle belongs to a man named Gunlog if you want to enter and live in the safety of the castle walls, protected and provided for by his hunters. You need to pay a tribute, 1 shard each week." Of course, there was exploitation going on even in this pit of despair. What else did he expect? As long as there were people, someone was going to end up as prey. Sonny sensed a familiar dark feeling rising up from the depths of his soul. At some point, he had lulled it into a slumber and forgotten it, but now it finally returned to its rightful place. A corner of his mouth curled up. What happens if you can't pay the tribute? The huntress glanced at him with confusion. What do you think? You are not allowed to step anywhere near the gates. There's a small settlement for us unfortunate wretches beneath the castle. Walls where we make do with what little we have and tremble in the night, hoping that nothing comes out of the darkness to devour us. That's pretty much it. He hesitated. But how are people even supposed to get soul shards in this cursed place? Effie gestured to the corpses of the monsters she had slain. By hunting, one can find awakened creatures here and there in the city. The trick is to find and kill them without stumbling into something far more deadly. Gunlog's people form parties and go out to hunt, with experienced pathfinders leading the way. They bring back food, memories, materials. And shards, nothing stops people from attempting the same. She fell silent for a few moments, and then said in a darker tone, of course, without good memories, vast amounts of accumulated soul, essence and intricate knowledge of the city, those people usually don't live long. Most of them either die or turn to other ways of earning shards. There's very few independent hunters, with more than a couple of successful hunts to their names, ones that are still alive, I mean. Sonny glanced at the dead monsters, each of them large enough to give him pause. What about you? How many did you survive? Effie smiled. More than a couple. With a chuckle, she raised her hand and began folding fingers, a thoughtful expression on her face. Let's see, 1, 2, 5. Running out of fingers on one hand, she scratched her head and said with a bit of uncertainty, I'm not really sure, but it should be around 100 or 2. Yeah. Sonny's eyes widened. 200. If what Effie had said was true, then she was a force to be reckoned with. Slaying even one awakened creature was worthy of respect. Slaying hundreds of them, however, was nothing short of remarkable, perhaps even heroic and a little fearsome, especially since she had hunted them alone, in the middle of a cursed ruin full of fallen abominations, unaided with no one to rely on except for herself. The easygoing huntress was not as simple as she appeared. He frowned. If this is true, then you should have had no problem paying the tribute to stay in the castle. This doesn't make sense. Why haven't you? Effie shrugged with ambivalence. The topic didn't seem to interest her. Let's just say that I don't like the ambience there. Sonny wanted to learn more, but suddenly Nephi spoke again, her voice strangely tense. You said that there were other ways of earning soul shards. What are they? The huntress turned to her and was silent for a while, a hint of some dark emotion in her eyes. However, it was quickly erased by her usual laid-back smile. Well, there's a few ways. If you have a useful utility ability, you can become a craftsman or an artifex in the castle. There's not a lot of such sleepers, so they are well regarded and cared for. If not, there are other opportunities, too. Boys can become Gunlog soldiers, while girls can enter his harem, pretty ones like the two of you especially. No one will force you, of course. Nephi scowled. Sonny could see white sparks dancing in her eyes. So, you can either become his soldier, his servant, his plaything, or die, but that is your own choice. No one is forcing anyone to do anything. Of course. Effie grinned. Smart girl. You get it. Changing Star looked down, her indifferent face turning hard and cold. Her fists were clenched so hard that they seemed bloodless. So why hasn't anyone killed him yet? The huntress laughed. Kill Gunlog. Oh, many have tried. Great people, terrible people, and everyone in between. You can see their skulls above the castle gate. Actually, she shook her head. I like your train of thought, princess, but you should forget it. Just consider him to be immortal. He practically is. Believe me when I say that no sleeper can defeat Gunlog ever. It's simply impossible. Effie sighed. Plus, no matter how much I hate the bastard, he is the only thing that holds this place together. Despicable as he is, without him, we would have all been dead already. Sonny watched Nephi's, waiting to see her reaction. What he saw did not make him happy at all. On her beautiful ivory face, there was nothing but cold indifference and resolve. It was the same expression he had seen on it before the battle with the Carapace Centurion first and the Carapace Demon later. Without even needing Cassie's pathetic ability, he could easily imagine what was going on in her head. This is going to become a problem. As though sensing the same thing, Effie grimaced. No, seriously, trying to go against Gunlaf will only get you killed. If You're lucky, don't even think about that. Thinking too much is not good for your health here in the dark city anyway. Then she smiled and gestured to the fire. Just have some of this delicious meat instead. Life is good when your stomach is full, right? Let me tell you, this is most likely your last chance to eat anything for free. Food is a real rarity in these parts, can you believe it? Sunny sighed, then leaned forward and picked up a sizzling piece of meat. No matter what happened, they had to keep going, one step at a time. This was the only way to survive. Of course I can believe it. I'm from the outskirts, you know. I didn't even know what real meat smells like before entering the academy. With that, he handed the piece of meat to Cassie, took another one, and began devouring it greedily. Nephi's lingered for a bit, but then followed his example. Effie giggled. That's the spirit. See, Doofus gets it. It seemed as though Changing Star had listened to her advice. At least on the surface, she had accepted that defeating the current master of the castle was impossible, but Sunny knew that, deep down inside, she remained unconvinced. After all, Nephis was in the habit of making impossible things happen. Chapter 129, Solace Shadow Slave. After the shocking revelation about the cruel futility of their long and arduous journey to the Dark City, the desire to reach the promised castle that kept the three of them going for so long had diminished significantly. However, they still wanted to get there as soon as possible. There was a tiny remnant of hope still burning in Sunny's heart. Perhaps Effie was lying to them or wrong about everything. Somehow, he didn't really believe it, though. The beautiful huntress seemed sincere and competent, if a little eccentric. More than that, her words made too much sense, but Effie wasn't in a rush to leave the granite tower. There's not enough daylight left to traverse that much distance. Moving through the ruins is a slow ordeal. Get comfortable and rest. We'll leave tomorrow at dawn. After that, she got busy dressing down the monster carcasses with a long knife that appeared in her hand. She even summoned a memory that looked like a leather apron to avoid getting blood on her tunic. Whistling an upbeat melody under her nose, the vigorous young woman looked like an enthusiastic gourmet chef. Nephis, Sunny, and Cassie were in no mood to talk. Each of them sat somberly by themselves, trying to digest the awful reality of their new situation. Sunny was utterly disheartened. He felt as though someone had pulled the batteries out of his body, leaving him with no strength or desire to do anything. The world had become dim and tiresome. That's hope for you. He didn't even have enough motivation to get angry. It was as though he had run an exhausting marathon and crossed the finish line only to find out that there was another race waiting for him on the other side. In fact, he would have to keep running forever. He would never meet Master Jet and Teacher Julius again to thank them for the advice and teachings that had helped him survive, and maybe even repay their kindness. He would never become an awakened and learn more mysteries of his strange aspect. Most importantly, his dreams of becoming rich and spending the rest of his life in comfort were also not meant to be, which hurt the most. Figures. Crestfallen, he made an effort to find some semblance of solace in this disastrous fiasco. Well, if you think about it, I'm still alive. That has to be worth something, right? His shadow glanced at him, not entirely convinced. Plus, I can easily stay alive for the foreseeable future. Yeah, the big picture changed for the worst, but our immediate situation has actually improved a lot. We are safe from the constant threat of drowning or being devoured by the dwellers of the deep dark sea. We have also found a strong community of humans. No matter how things were run in the castle, there were hundreds of people living there. Numbers and experience meant everything in the dream realm. By becoming a part of a human collective, they were going to shed most of the burdens that had been silently crushing them all this time. Compared to the infernal gauntlet of the labyrinth, life in the castle was going to be like a dream, if they were willing to submit to its thug of a master, of course. If Sunny was alone, he probably would. Now, however, but even if they were to refuse, there was still the outer settlement. Effie seemed to be doing just fine as an independent hunter. She didn't even seem miserable. In fact, she might just be the most contented person I've ever seen. Seriously, how can she be so laid back and cheerful? Is she insane? He cast a sidelong glance at the unreasonably tall huntress and frowned. Well, let's ponder about it. She has a roof over her head and a limitless supply of delicious food, provided that she hunts it down herself. That is already better than my life in the outskirts. Come to think about it, remaining in the dark city for the rest of his life was not how he had envisioned his future. but it was not that different from struggling to survive in the slums of the real world. Actually, in a lot of senses, it was way better. So maybe the situation seemed to be so bad not because it actually was, but because it simply didn't fit his inflated expectations. Perhaps Effie didn't expect anything from life at all, and that's why she was so damn happy and lively even in the middle of this odious hell. Yeah, that must be it. Problem solved. Easy. The shadow shook its head and turned away. Sonny sighed. Despite his somewhat rational attempt to find the bright side in this calamity, he didn't feel any better at all. In fact, thinking about how inescapable and bleak their future was only made him more tired. Suddenly his skin crawled. The familiar sensation of dread and unease flooded his mind, only now it was so much more profound and invasive. The shadow of the crimson spire had fallen on the dark city. Soon the sound of waves crashing against stone informed them of the coming of night. Not in the mood to even stand up, Sonny silently sent his shadow to take a look outside. As the last rays of the falling sun colored the world in the shades of red, the cursed sea was surging out of the great crater. Sonny watched as the distant statue of the beautiful faceless woman was slowly drowned by the darkness, until only her open hand remained above the waves. Then he shifted his gaze and looked down. The undulating black surface of the cursed sea stopped mere meters beneath the edge of the granite wall. It seemed as though he could almost touch it. With his hand, on the other side of the stone barrier, the ruined city lay, submerged in shadows, dozens of meters below the water level, trapped between the endless expanse of the dark sea and the vast emptiness. Of the ruins, the mighty wall seemed to be as thin as a sheet of paper, and yet it silently withstood the crushing pressure of the black waves, serving as a dam that protected the city below from being erased by the terrible flood, just like it did for thousands of years. However, Sonny couldn't help but imagine all that crushing weight bursting through the collapsing wall in an all-consuming torrent of darkness. He felt shivers running down his spine. Commanding his shadow to return, Sonny finally forced himself to stand up and walked over to Nephi's. Changing Star was sitting with her back against the wall, a dark expression on her face. Hearing his footsteps, she raised her eyes. Sonny sat down beside her, lingered for a while, and then said, "What do you think?" She was silent for a long time, simply looking at him with an inexorable expression, just when he was about to think that there would be no answer. Neph finally spoke. As she did, white sparks ignited in the depths of her cold gray eyes. "We will find a way to return. No matter what has to be done, we will." Her words echoed inside the granite tower, making shadows on the walls dance in sinister glee. Chapter 130, Strength of a Dozen Men. In the morning, they set out for the castle. Before leaving the safe haven of the granite tower, Effie gave them a list of instructions. "Follow behind me. Listen to everything I say. Don't make any noise. Don't bleed. Don't think too much. Some of the creatures out there can hear noisy thoughts. Others can sense strong emotions, so don't feel fear either." Sonny stared at her with a grim expression. How was he supposed to control what he feels? The vigorous huntress grinned. "What? You never tried to solve math equations in your head to impress a lovely lady? Just do the same." As Sonny's SHEEKS began to turn bright red, she giggled and turned to Cassie and Neph. "Correction, the two of you try not to feel fear. Doofus, you try not to get too excited. If walking behind me turns out to be too much, ask to get slapped, all right." Sonny scowled and uttered through gritted teeth, "That won't be a problem." Effie blinked a couple of times, then smiled. "Ah, playing for the other team? I see, I see. What was that supposed to mean?" Trying to get his emotions under control, Sonny took a deep breath and counted to 10. "Math equations, my ass. Who does she think she is? Wait, why am I counting?" Making sure that they understood her instructions, the huntress turned around and rolled the massive slab of granite that blocked the exit from the tower to the side. Lean muscles tensed and moved under her olive skin, making for a picturesque view. Sonny stared at her back and gulped. That slab of granite had to weigh a couple of tons at least. How strong was the beautiful giantess exactly? Catching a glimpse of his stare, Effie raised an eyebrow and winked. "Like what you see." He answered on autopilot. "Yes, wait, no, I mean that's not why I was looking. How are you?" "That's strong." She glanced at the granite slab, then at him. "Oh, that's my aspect ability. It's a strong all-around physical enhancement. That was a very rare and powerful ability to have. While not as flashy as many others, it was practically the ultimate warrior ability, with not only Her strength, but also her speed, agility, endurance, and resilience boosted. Effie was like one of those ancient heroes Neff sometimes talked about, especially since that boost seemed to be so extravagant. Plus, she had most likely absorbed a very large amount of soul essence over the years of hunting monsters in the Dark City. All those shards, the recalcitrant huntress refused to pay as tribute to the tyrannical lord of the castle had to go somewhere, but why would she just admit what her ability was? Sharing secrets like that was not a wise thing to do, especially not in the ruthless reality of the Forgotten Shore. Noticing his surprise, Effie grinned. What? It's not like it's a great mystery. Around here, anyone with a pair of eyes knows what my ability can do. Do you want me to tell you what my flaw is as well? There was a mischievous glint in her eyes. Yeah, right, as if anyone is insane enough to share there. It's very simple. My aspect not only enhances all my physical attributes, it also does the same with all my physical needs. Why do you think I ate enough meat to create a literal pile of gnawed bones for the fun of it? She laughed and shook her head. Well, it was fun, not gonna lie. So the price for having the strength of many men was to have the hunger of many men as well. Out here in the Dark City, where food was scarce and hard to come by, it was a dangerous flaw to possess. It was a curse that could force a person to hunt more, and therefore risk injury and death more than anyone else would have to. Most people would scoff at its severity, but not Sonny. He knew what hunger, real hunger, felt like, what it could do to a person. Perhaps that was the reason why Effie was out here in the first place. Perhaps she had become a huntress not because she wanted to, but because she simply didn't have a choice. What other physical needs do people have? Sonny thought a little. Confused, air then water and food then Hey, I said not to get excited. Sonny flinched and looked up at Effie, who was staring at him and cackling. Embarrassed, he gritted his teeth in anger. Don't flatter yourself, Beanpole. However, when he noticed that Nephi's and Cassie were observing them, with amusement clearly written on their faces, his anger somewhat subsided. Belatedly, Sonny realized that perhaps the experienced huntress had been joking around with him, not just out of pure mischief. Perhaps she was trying to lighten the mood to get them into the right mental state, thus making traversing the cursed city less perilous. Meanwhile, Effie grinned. What? No answer. Sonny glared at her and said, Don't distract me. Then he forcefully changed the flow of his thoughts and reluctantly added, I'm solving equations. A minute later, they left the granite tower and stepped onto the streets of the Dark City. Effie had summoned the helmet of her archaic armor before venturing forth. It was of the Corinthian design, with a tall crest of blue horsehair and a narrow visor that left only her eyes and lips exposed. On her back, there was a leather bag containing the meat, bones, and hides of the monsters she had slain during the hunt. Sonny knew for a fact that this bag was much larger on the inside than it seemed from the outside. Otherwise, in order to accommodate all of F's trophies, it would have had to be comically big. However, it still weighed way too much for an ordinary person to carry. Including the armor, the long knife, and the black leather apron, it was the fourth memory he had seen the huntress summon. He wondered how many more did she have in her arsenal. He had yet to see what weapons Effie used. In the ghostly light of early dawn, they entered the cursed ruins.